Chapter 3 The Ride North, in which dreams are had and myths are seen. Yennefer opened her eyes to reveal a sea of stars. 1,000 twinkling lights filled an endless sapphire blue expanse, a great sun blazing gold close in the distance. She was dreaming. She had to be. Yen thought she could even faintly feel the gentle rocking of the carriage lulling her to sleep. Why, then, did everything seem so real? Hello? Yen called out into eternity. Her voice was swallowed by the infinite, producing not even so much as an echo. She waited for a long moment, uncertain whether silence or a response from the beyond would be worse. Even though her instincts warned her against it, Yen tried again. Hello? Is anyone there? She shouted, louder than before. Here. The voice came from everywhere at once, soft but all-encompassing. It was a feminine voice, gentle and matronly. Yen froze, stunned, as she floated in the void. Feel. The voice spoke again, as much from outside of Yen as within. It seemed as if the words were coming from within her own heart. She started, looking around vainly in search of the speaker. Who said that? She shouted to the stars. Who are you? As strange and unsettling as the dream was, Yen oddly didn't feel scared. There was no fear in her voice, only confusion. Then the stars went out, not all at once and not violently. A canvas of darkness spread over the sky, each twinkling light extinguishing one by one, until Yen was suddenly, terribly alone. The sun, once so warm and inviting, began to cool. Before she could so much as open her mouth in horror, it vanished too, leaving her adrift in the abyss. Now she was afraid, and she screamed desperately at the black, empty void. Please, she cried, still flailing about in the hope she would see something, feel something. Help me! Yen's heart was beating so fast it was drumming in her chest like a battering ram. I don't want to be alone! For what felt like an eternity, there was only the sound of her own panicked breathing. Think. From Yennefer's chest came a dim but growing glow, a light that became more resplendent by the second. The fear evaporated as Yen stared at this power spilling out of her, even as it became too bright to see. Her eyes hurting, she closed them as it grew ever brighter and brighter until all became light. Yen jolted awake to violent shaking of her shoulder, reality suddenly asserting itself. Looking directly into her eyes was a young Ellison boy, wrapped in a rough-spun traveler's robe. His silver hair and deep blue eyes were unlike any Yen had seen before, his gentle features showing a strangely adult concern. Yen wagered he was in his early adolescence, still some years away from the growth spurt that would put the boy head and shoulders taller than her, like the rest of his race. The boy brushed a lock of hair back over his pointed ears, frowning. Are you quite all right, madame? He asked, his voice soft and refined. Even his tone was unusually mature for his age. Yen sat up, blinking to clear her vision, while trying her best not to careen into the child only ilms away from her nose. I'm fine? She looked past him to the other two passengers. Both the carriage master, Bremont, and another Ellison child, a young girl about as old as the one playing surgeon, were staring at her. Did something happen? Yen asked, feeling uneasy. You were, The boy trailed off, searching for a polite enough phrasing. Bremont had no such compunctions. Ye was screaming, lass, and thrashing about as if the seventh hell was dragging ye below. Quite, the boy muttered in dry agreement. Your heart rate was very fast, and your skin is both cold and clammy. I worry you may be ill. Hearing her symptoms laid out made Yen feel ill, and no small amount of strange. Behind the boy, Bremont shook his head. Looks like the aether sickness to me, he said dismissively. You from here, Miss Ford? Yen started, locking eyes with him instantly, chest growing taut with the question. What? From Eorzea, miss, Bremont hurriedly clarified. He seemed honestly surprised by her reaction. Was just asking if you're born here is all. Oh. Yen relaxed, the tightness in her chest easing only an ilm. I grew up in Quarry Mill. Bremont scratched at the grey beard covering his chin. Odd. You should be used to it by now. Used to what? The boy asked, shuffling back to where the other Ellison sat. The aether. They say there's more of it here than anywhere else on the star. Bremont shrugged. Usually outsiders get a bit funny first time they arrive. Messes with their humors. I see. Yen could practically hear the boy roll his eyes. In any case, I believe that your symptoms will pass shortly. The boy gave an indifferent tilt of his head. Gridania has no deficit of healers, should your condition continue, or worsen. Thanks, Yen replied with a deadpan voice. Who was this kid? Bremont leaned in his seat to pull down an inconspicuous panel of wood, revealing behind it a hidden compartment. Yen stared at him, surprised. She certainly knew of smugglers plying their trade, as merchants often bragged when too deep in the bottle of narrow scrapes with the wood whalers. But she hadn't expected Bremont to so brazenly reveal himself as one to his passengers. All eyes were on the carriage master as he stuck his hand inside the smuggling compartment, only to retrieve it a moment later with the wine bottle in hand. He tugged on the cork with his teeth, which came free with a loud pop, before leaning forward and holding it out before Yen. Have a sip. It'll calm your nerves. Hesitantly, Yen accepted the mystery alcohol. She held it just below her nose. Its scent was very sweet, almost like apples. Whether or not that meant that the drink was any good was beyond her, but the smell was nice at least. She leaned back, bringing the bottle to her lips, and was just about to take a swig, when a terrifically loud horn honked directly in her ear. By the power of a small miracle, Yen barely managed to avoid spilling the drink as she jumped in her seat, whipping her head about to face the offending noise. The Black Shroud had many myths, tall tales of ghostly knights, only some of which had heads, of cities made of mold, and of amber dragons. Perhaps the most common fable, though, was that of a race of mischievous sprites, capricious in kind and equal measure, and, oddly, the ones who delivered unwanted or just plain lost parcels and messages to one's door. They were the stuff of fantasy, floating, fluffy, bear-like creatures with great red palms dangling from their heads and wings too small to keep them aloft, though float they did. They did not exist beyond children's fables. And yet, Yen was looking eye to eye with one. She stared at the Moogle, and the Moogle stared back. In its hand was a simple brass horn, hanging loosely from its paw. For reasons only known to the fantastic creature, it brought the horn back to its snout and tooted it right in Yen's face. Hey! Yen shouted, wincing at the loud noise. Cut that out! The Moogle all but dropped its horn in surprise. You can see us, Koopa? The Moogle chirped in a childlike, high-pitched voice. Of course, Yen said irritably, the ridiculous nature of the situation lost beneath the annoyance. Can't... She swept her gaze back towards the other passengers, all of whom were staring at her with very concerned looks on their faces. Everyone? It was, of course, the Ellison boy who spoke first. Are you... well, madame? I really don't know, Yen sighed, resigned to this odd fate. There's a Moogle right behind me. There was a pause so pregnant that it was entering labor. Bremont stared at the bottle in her hand suspiciously. Nonsense, miss. Moogles don't exist, he said, attempting to sound comforting. They're made up, like dragons and people from Sharlayan. The Ellison girl suddenly had what sounded like a coughing fit. The carriage master eyed her, worried. Is she all right? Ether sickness, the boy flatly replied, his eyes boring to the girl disapprovingly. She isn't the one I'm concerned about presently. He turned to look at Yen. Is, the Moogle, is it still there? Yen slowly turned around, praying that nothing would be hovering over her shoulder. To her immense exasperation, not only was the Moogle still there, it had multiplied. There were now no less than 3 of them floating in the carriage, and all seemed very animated. Made up, their apparent leader squeaked, outraged. Do I look like a fable to you, Koopo? How does he think the mail arrives? Magic? Hey, now, Yen raised her hands placatingly. I'm sure he meant nothing by it. It seemed to have some effect on the Moogles, but rather the opposite on her fellow riders. Good gods, now you're talking to him, Bremont swore. I think you need another drink. I'd say she rather needs the opposite. For the first time since Yen had boarded the carriage, the Ellison girl had piped in. For some reason, it felt more surprising than the Moogles. The girl leaned forward and snapped the wine jug out of Yen's hand in a flash, handing it back to Bremont. The carriage master stared down at the bottle before gently laying it on the wagon's floor. The moment it exited his hand, one of the Moogles darted towards it. Yen thought the better of saying anything as the creature picked up the jug and started to drink. Say, the lead Moogle said, unfortunately forcing Yen to continue engaging with it. Have you seen anyone suspicious, lady? Kupo? Black mask, black robe? Yen slowly shook her head no. The Moogle bobbed in the air contemplatively. Well, keep your eyes open, Kupo. Hopefully we'll meet again. I really hope not, Yen muttered. From behind her, a now much wobblier Moogle drifted to join the others. Together, the three living fables fluttered up and away, disappearing into the forest's canopy. Roger, save me. I'm not going mad, am I? She slumped in her seat. Cheer up, miss. Bremont gave a weak smile. It's the Aether, I'm sure of it. Still, the boy cut in, if you see any more Moogles, please see a healer. I'll be sure to, Yen flatly answered, hanging her head back with a sigh. The day was getting much too busy for her. It was already so overwhelming, and it had only barely begun. Bremont clicked with his tongue as some thought crossed his mind, then reached for the bottle. A foul look came over him. What the? He frowned as he lifted the jug up. This thing was full when I put it down. Yen smiled wryly. Maybe someone from Charlotte drank it. The coughing fit began again. A bell had passed without incident. How far exactly they were from Gridania, Yen wasn't sure, but Bremont had assured the carriage that they would arrive not long after noon. Yen was relieved by the quiet. No Moogles, no bad dreams. The Black Shroud seemed almost peaceful. Oh, bugger! Bremont swore viciously. All eyes turned to him, and from him to the point in the road he was scowling at. No less than 4 wood whalers had emerged from seemingly nowhere, their spears in their hands. Yen's pulse skyrocketed, her breathing already galloping away from her. What did you do? She hissed at him, furious. Nothing they ought to know about, Bremont whispered back. Calm down and stay quiet for matron's sake. Yen grit her teeth, but as her options were just about non-existent, she did as she was told. In the name of Gridania, halt! An Elezen in green armor yelled. Covering his eyes was a thin green mask, hiding his expression and focus terrifyingly well. Bremont pulled on the reins, the chocobos squawking as they came to a halt. The Elezen stayed where he was as his 3 companions moved to surround the wagon. Morning, good sirs, Bremont shouted cheerfully. Can I help you? You can, the guard replied icily, by stating passengers and cargo. Bremont shrugged amicably. 3 chartered to Gridania, 1 adult and 2 children. He was doing his best to sound bored. I'm carrying their belongings and some small goods for sale. The wood whaler was silent for a moment, leering at the carriage. If you're carrying that little, then you would find no harm in us checking, correct? Bremont shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I, would rather you didn't. One of me passengers is sick with something, matron knows what, and... Are you telling me no, driver? The guard cut him off sharply. Not as such, Bremont stammered. Just that I don't think it's wise is all. Your concern is appreciated, the wood whaler sarcastically said. Dismount and be searched. I won't tell you again. There was a strange sound from the thicket beyond, like a great and sharp sigh. An arrow streaked past the soldier and buried itself into the side of the wagon, missing the whaler by mere ilms. Ambush! Another wood whaler screamed as he wheeled around to face where the arrow had come from. More sighs, and 3 more arrows rained from the forest, hitting the wagon's wooden walls with meaty thuds. From the undergrowth emerged 4 bird-like creatures, bipedal and taller than any man by more than a head at least, with long craggy beaks and bright feathers draping from their arms and body. Yen froze as she recognized them, not from experience but by reputation. The Ixal. As the wood whalers wheeled about to face the ambush, it was Bremont of all people who reacted fastest. Yah! He roared, giving the reins a fierce snap of the wrist. The passengers only barely managed to not spill out the back as the twin-pack chocobos, needing little encouragement, surged ahead. No one had so much as a minute to respond as the wagon sped away from the battlefield as fast as its wheels would allow. Yen gasped for air, only now realizing she had been holding her breath. Roger, save us. Ixal? So close to Gridania? Aye, and they range farther south by the moon, Bremont said grimly. Would that the beasties be driven out of the Twelves would. Yen slumped in her seat, shaking her head in disbelief. If the raiding tribes were already here, how much longer until they were braying at Quarry Mill's gates?